Thank you very much for joining me today, Sonya. Can you, give us a little bit of background and I guess talk to us about your role as a science communicator? You know, how do you, what do you see as being your role?
Sure. Well, thank you, Olivia. It's lovely to be able to have a chat. So I'm a filmmaker and I make documentary films, and I specialise in making science documentary films. And I've been doing this for about 20 years, and we've won a lot of awards, including an Emmy, which is lovely, in New York. And 5 times we've won the the Eureka Prize for Science Communication, and that's still a record. And I bring that up because what I'm committed to is stories of science communication. I originally, I've come from a medical family and a scientific family, and I was going to study medicine, but I quickly bailed and went over to arts. But I'm still very much interested in the combination of arts and science. I specifically set up my company, Gene Pool Productions, to explore areas where science is contested and where there's polarization. The majority of our films are about things like vaccines, uranium, vitamins, contested, and more recently, climate. We did climate years ago, a film called Crude, the story of oil, and that did really well all around the world. That's over a decade ago now. And we were waiting very carefully to think about what the next climate film would be. And we spent 4 years on our current film, which is called Carbon. But fundamentally, I see myself as a science communicator first and a filmmaker second. And that's not to say that I don't care about filmmaking. I do. I was head of Specialist Factual at the ABC for 4 years. I made a lot of films. I think I'm up to, I lose track, but I think I'm up to about 80 films, which is a lot.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot.
And not all as director, some as director, some as producer, always producer. I think I've directed about 60 of those 80. So I write and direct and produce and executive produce films, documentary films for television globally, and I focus on science. And that's very privileged to do.
Yeah. And I guess you talked about, trying to attack those topics that are polarizing. And that's got to be daunting, right? Because, you're entering, I guess, a discussion that's out there, that it's heated. People are very passionate. I mean, we saw this with COVID. We've seen it with other topics. And climate, there could not be a more loaded topic than climate, with vested interests involved and all sorts of things. So is that daunting, launching into a project like that? And how do you approach it?
Yeah, well, I made a decision. There's not much point in me making films about things that are accepted. Like, I can make a film about gravity, but gravity is pretty much established. I could make films about all sorts of things, that how science impacts our world. But what interests me is the areas where we have a clash, and a clash because of either a misunderstanding of science or there's active disinformation out there. And sometimes it's just clarity. So I've made films about cancer, and people misunderstand cancer. They don't realize that cancer is just one of your cells that's gone wrong and then multiplied. They think cancer comes in from outside and somehow infects you like a virus. No. So that's sometimes, making films that just clarify things and help people understand. But in terms of polarization, I'm deeply interested in the types of films and the idea of when we have multiple ways to look at the same data and the same information. And around vaccines, that's incredibly emotional, incredibly problematic. And around uranium, that also was the case. The hardest one I've ever done was vitamins, weirdly, and that's because the science is less clear and it's harder to have really clear outcomes. You could argue for till the cows come home about how some vitamins work or don't work. Talking about vitamins as supplements rather than vitamins in their natural form. But with climate, it's so contentious in the sense of that 99, I think it is now, % of the scientists of the world, 99.8, I think somebody said recently, agree in the fundamental issue that we have climate change occurring because of human activity, and primarily fossil fuels, so that's accepted. But of course, there's all these groups and areas of the world that argue how much and what causes it and how bad is it, and people who get cross about greenwashing and all this sort of stuff. So what I wanted to do was use our skills as a science communication company to go, how do we explore this issue in a way that hasn't been done before, because there's lots of films out there that are really good films about why climate change matters and the damage it's been doing, is doing, and the trajectory we're on. Those films are good, they work. The challenge was for us is to put something new out there that helped people understand climate change in a different way. And we spent 4 years watching the other films out there, thinking about how we could do it. And then we came up with this idea. It's partly generated by my niece, who, when she was about 6, we went on the school's climate march, and she said, "Oh, Auntie, this is the first march I've ever been on that I actually want to be on." And that was hilarious. But then she said, "I don't understand why trees make a difference."
Yep.
And so I was trying to explain to a 6-year-old why planting trees helps, and trying to explain the carbon cycle. And meanwhile, our wonderful director in-house, Daniela Ortega, had read a short story by Primo Levi called Carbon in his book, The Periodic Table. And he takes you on the journey of a single carbon atom and gets you really understand a carbon atom. And the ideas sort of came together going, well, if what we could contribute is an understanding of what carbon is, how carbon works, how the cycles move through different parts of life. And then once you understand the carbon cycle, then you can understand climate change at a different level. We're not making an advocacy film. I should be really clear. Carbon is not an advocacy film. There's lots of great advocacy films out there about climate change and what we need to do. It is a film, a scientific documentary that helps you understand an aspect of that story better. And it's a fundamental aspect, literally fundamental. It is about carbon. And then the really big kind of adventure is, how do we do this in a way that's different? And that's when we decide to anthropomorphize carbon, give her a voice, make her a woman. And for some people, this is outrageous and they get terribly cross with us, and for other people, they love it. And that was the beginning of our adventure and how to make this different kind of film. But the objective was also always to contribute to the conversations around climate change, but with a fresh perspective. Now, why does, I should just say that one of the things we focus on is crossing the divide, trying to talk to people who don't agree with us, who don't think the same as us. And so to cross the divide, you need to understand what people on the other side think, right? So people who are climate deniers or climate skeptics, or just not terribly motivated to do anything. So we spent a lot of time working with the Monash Climate Change Communication Hub with Yale. I've done 4, 5, 6 years now working with Yale and their climate. So they're specifically to do with science communication. And a one academic, Rebecca Huntley, and she wrote a book about climate change and how we communicate it. And we must have spent the best part of a year just talking and watching and going, look, some films that talk about, say, polar bears floating on ice floes, they're off climate skeptics, because they go, oh, there's that trope, there's that cliche, I'm not going to pay attention anymore. We have to be very careful with bushfires and the burning koala shots, because again, there's a group of Australians, that's a specifically Australian trigger, that will switch off from watching anything about that. So we did a lot of study into what people who are climate skeptics are skeptical about, why they're skeptical, and what kind of communication might cut through and allow them to watch this film. And what the evidence shows us, and by that I mean what the people who study the science of science communication were able to show us, is that if you arouse curiosity and do not trigger the us and them divide in your film, and pro or anti-climate, don't trigger that. And then you take usually trigger that, and that is that archetypal image of the polar bear, right? It switches people off. They've done the studies of this, they can show this. So when we took those things, those tropes out of the film and made it the story of an element, not the story of climate change, the story of an element, then we tested this on many audience groups, we found that they then engaged.
I think it's disarming.
Yeah.
It's kind of disarming. Yeah.
What sort of film this was. And look, just because someone is a climate skeptic doesn't mean they're not interested in science. You know, and people, they're not. In fact, often people who are on the extreme of the kind of conspiracy theory side of things, whether it's on vaccines, uranium, climate, often they're highly educated and highly informed. Of a minutiae. And so what we decided to do was pull it back to the big picture and just say, look, come on this journey of this story of carbon. Engage with it. It's a great ride. Learn about photosynthesis, learn about how trees, store carbon, learn about this stuff. And at about the 1 hour mark into a 90-minute film, we finally hit climate. And by that stage, you're ready to go, oh, look, of course it influences the climate. And of course, when I say carbon, I'm talking about carbon dioxide. So I should be careful here. But the story of carbon, the element, is not just the story of carbon dioxide. It is the story of carbon herself. And so by following that journey of carbon, and then we get to the climate change section of the film, we decided not to finish there. We go, this is one part of carbon's story in her form as carbon dioxide. What if we continue it and we go on millions, billions of years into the future to show as basically an immortal element in many ways? And so the whole arc of the story is following carbon through this. And the idea is that underneath it, you will then understand the carbon cycle and how carbon dioxide works to exacerbate climate change.
Great. Okay. Yeah, look, I mean, it's been, I as you know, attended the opening when it was launched in March 2022, yes, in Australia. And it was just, I mean, it definitely hit me in a way, honestly, no other documentary really has. And I agree. And at the time, I couldn't really tell exactly why it had such an impact on me, but when you break it down, the methodology makes sense. I think, I can imagine a lot of study would have been done just looking into what does work and what doesn't, and the fact that you've sort of drawn people in, taking them on that journey, the carbon's journey, before even mentioning climate change. That's the thing, because it's if you pull people into the story and straight away attack those big contentious issues, you'd lose people, up front. You'd lose a lot of people. And really the end goal needs to be unification. We actually have a job to do here. This is really important.
So knowing your audience, like we made a decision right at the beginning that we're not preaching to the converted. Even though they are the converted, you can come and enjoy this film and engage with it. But actually, we are aiming not at the full-on climate skeptics, because that's way out on that. We're aiming at the people in the middle who just don't quite understand, or really want a bit more depth, or my now 14-year-old niece, who just wants to understand how planting trees helps. So we knew our audience, and we knew that we wanted to aim at that audience. And we studied that audience, and we used the data that are out there to understand the audience that other academics have done. And then we had academics analyze our film and run tests on our film. So we worked with Monash at the Climate Communication Hub, and they helped us test with focus groups, people who were climate skeptics or on the spectrum of climate skepticism. And we got some very good feedback. For example, we did have a clip in there of Obama, and we had a whole conversation about whether that was appropriate, because that triggers all this sort of stuff. We'd accidentally put a polar bear shot in somewhere, and everyone went, oh my God, no. Really, honestly, it was such a strong image that turns people off. Terrible. But we had to know our audience. We had to embrace the complexity of that and go, you can't have a simple little story here. It's a complicated story. So we embraced the complexity of it. And I think that's something a lot of people are worried about. They feel like they have to oversimplify. We acknowledge uncertainty where we need to, because science is not settled. There's times when we don't quite know, but this is what we think is going on. It's really important if you're trying to communicate across the divide that you acknowledge that. We had to check for our bias a lot. One of the things we do with all our films is go, now hang on, I've got my bias. You know, I'm pro this, that. Check I'm making a film that just supports my bias, you know, because we make science documentaries, so it's a dangerous thing to not check your own bias. The other thing I think is really important is to use narrative and storytelling and metaphor, you know, in science communication. And the journey of carbon had to be enjoyable. It had to be a story. It had to be a film with a beginning, middle, and end. It can't wag your finger educational film. That's just not going to work, you know. No. So you're balancing all of these. And we got very clear on what I call the gist. That's G-I-S-T, you know, the gist of the story. And, you know, what was the essence of what we were trying to communicate? And it took us ages to really work it out that, you know, this is the story of the carbon cycle.
Yeah.
And along get all of these messages. And your takeaway at the end, we have one very key takeaway. And basically, that is your vote matters.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's the greatest influence you can have, really. Yeah, very true. So I guess, you know, for me, I see a lot of parallels. As you know, I'm from renewable energy communications. Positive Good has a lot of, all of our clients are in renewable energy. And so, you know, there are a set of challenges. I mean, straight away from the outset, renewable energy is seen as one of the solutions to climate change, you know, so how we, there's the climate communication side of things, and renewable energy communications is sort of parallel, but different. I guess I wanted to run through some of our challenges with you, because I know the industry will be watching, and and I'd love to be able to, I think we have a lot to learn from you, and that there are those parallels with science, you know. But some of our challenges are, we need to make people care about energy. That's, you know, that's pretty hard to do, when in the past they've really wanted to switch off from it. I guess with rising power prices, that's changing. And also people are more interested in their own carbon footprint. So, you know, that's helping as well, but we need to make them care about energy. We also need to make it okay for people to talk with others about what they have done, you know, when they've had solar installed or batteries, or they've bought an EV, you know, because these are seen as a bit, you know, it's a privilege, I guess, to be able to get those things. So we want to make it okay to talk about it. Also, you know, I guess urging big polluters to divest from fossil fuels, you know, and establish new business models. That's something that's important, you know, as a communications challenge. And then also greenwashing is probably one of the biggest issues out there. So holding companies, high polluting companies who are out there greenwashing, holding them to account, and even agencies who are supporting them and profiting from that greenwashing as well. So, I mean, I guess being a science communicator and being good at what you do, what would be your advice to the renewable energy industry to help, you know, overcome some of those challenges?
That's a big question. Look, I'm sure a lot of the people that are watching or that you're talking about know much more than I will ever know about the difficulties of their particular niche area, or their area they're trying to deliver information about. I guess what I've learned, number one, is get very clear on your audience. If you try and scattergun and get everyone, you're in trouble. I do mainstream television. Our films get seen by 10 to 20 million people over a 10-year period. You could say that I'm trying to get everyone, but actually I'm not. I've worked out very clearly that this is the group that I want to target. Now, great if we get this lot and this lot and this lot, but that's the group we're after. So know your audience. And then I personally say go talk to the academics who are studying this, because there's people out there with vast amounts of information. So if your issue is how to deal with greenwashing as a specific example, if I was in Australia, I would pick up the phone to people like Rebecca Huntley and say, Rebecca, what have your teams done on this? What do I need to know? Or talk to guys at Monash or whoever is studying this. Go to Yale. They've got a huge climate communication hub at Yale. It's extraordinary the amount of data they're collecting. Find out what we already know, so you're not reinventing the wheel. And it might be that for the audiences that are skeptical, there's trigger words, right? And when you avoid those trigger words, they stop being triggered. I'll give you an example, different medium, but with a different subject, different issue. With the vaccines films, we could not use the words herd immunity. If we use the words herd immunity, switch off. Group after group we tested, they start fiddling with their phones, they scratch, they roll their eyes, they look around going, oh, herd immunity.
Yeah.
So we took the words out, but explained the concept of rings of protection. They watched, they engaged. It's not that we didn't deal with the issue. We just took away the trigger points. So knowing the trigger points around the issue that you're trying to communicate is so helpful. Now, some criticize me and say, look, you're just, dodging around them. And I don't know, some people say it's like marketing to them. I'm going, no, I'm learning that that's an area of sensitivity and I've got to be careful. For example, polar bear, the shot of bushfires. There's people that turn off when you show them bushfire imagery is quite substantial in this country. And again, Huntley's been one of the people who studied that. So there's people out there that have done this work. I would be checking who else has studied this, what have they learned, what can I learn from that? And then I would try to generate curiosity. Again, at Yale, there's a Professor Dan Kahan from the Cultural Cognition Project. They study how cultures think about problems. And he specifically looks at polarization and specifically looks at climate. And what they discovered is that if you can surprise people with something curious that they're not expecting, they will listen. You are not expecting Carbon to be a woman that speaks to you, let alone played by Sarah Snook, And so a lot of people scratch their heads and go, what is this film about? What? How can this, what? And you engage them. And we've got to engage them for 90 minutes. That's a long time. So, and for people over 55-year-old males, it often doesn't work. We've done enough study now to go that it really works with younger people, particularly younger females. But older, middle-aged and elderly men really don't like Carbon being as a woman. Really interesting that. But anyway, so know your audience and think about how you can generate curiosity would be the main things.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. And you're right, because, and some of those triggers, I mean, it's human nature, isn't it? We pigeonhole things when we see one of those triggers that, says to us, okay, I guess it gives background information as to where this film is coming from, whether there is a bias, and it could be a film, it could be a piece of written content.
Dan Kahan explains it really simply. He said it's us and them. You trigger us and them. You fail to get to the them. It's very easy to us. We all know what is us. That's easy. But you want to get them. So if you take out every reference in your visual communication, in your spoken or your written communication, that triggers the us and them polarity, it really helps. So I never call somebody who is vaccine hesitant anti-vaccine. Hello, you will never talk to somebody who is scared of vaccines or vaccine hesitant. They don't think of themselves as anti-vaccine. They think of themselves as hesitant and nervous and worried and concerned. So saying climate change is not real or is not such a problem, calling them climate deniers, there's not many that actually really fall into that camp. That's a very, very small group. But there's a whole lot of people that go, oh, it can't be that bad. Oh, I just can't deal with it. Oh, I've got other priorities to feed my family. Or, whatever their reasons are. And again, there's lots of really good study on those groups in climate, right? 5 groups in Australia, 7 groups in America, or is it the other way around? I can't quite remember. But and they've broken them into the different quadrants of climate skepticism. And once you understand those quadrants, you can kind of go, okay, I'm aiming at those 3 or those 3. And they require different language. I mean, and Dan Kahan at Yale has another wonderful idea. He's not alone in this, other people have done it as well. But he said, it's not stupid people, and it's not information deficit model, right? It's not about people need more information. People have got access to lots of information. We've got Google in our hands. It's not about feeding people more information. It's about engaging them on a level they want to be engaged at, and then taking them on a journey, and then hopefully helping them land where you want them to land with an understanding they may not have had at the beginning. But it's not more information, and it's not. And once you start treating those people who are on the them side with some respect, then your style of communication changes. I've had so many vaccine hesitant families and people come up to me, even now, 8-9 years after the film's been out around the world. They still come up to me going, your film changed how I thought about vaccines, because you didn't make out that I was an idiot for being scared to vaccinate my kid. You said, okay to be afraid.
Yeah.
10 years ago, that was radical, really radical. So, we've got to think about what the equivalent message with climate might be. It's okay to think this has been beaten up, or it's okay to not feel that you can deal with this right now. But this is what's going on. It's very hard for all of us to really deal with the climate catastrophe. I can't. And I read huge amounts and talked to, Will Stephan, the late Will Stephan was such a good and such a joy and such a wonderful man to help communicate this stuff. And he knew he had to do it with verve and humor and energy, and he was so gentle with us. He could see what was happening and what's coming our way, and he wasn't beating us up about it. He was trying to hold our hands and say, come on, we can do stuff. And I don't know, there'll be smarter minds than mine out there thinking about how to deal with this. But I think it's one of the biggest issues of our time, and we have to deal with it. And we have to keep thinking, how do we cross the divide? Not to the climate deniers and climate hardcore skeptics, because, they're a very diminishing group. Let's not get distracted by the fringe. Let's focus on the people that just feel it's overwhelming and too much and too hard.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. It's a very, very confronting issue, I think that the main focus needs to be, you're right, just to unify people and to, I guess, lead them into a safe space where we can have the discussion, And
remember, I have all the answers. So, in 2 years' time, there'll be some new perspective. For example, seeding the atmosphere or burying geosequestration, burying carbon, all these ideas that there are all sorts of groups within groups fighting about whether that's good, whether that's bad. And there's so much chatter about that. And you're going, come on, the main game here is, stop pulling this stuff out of the ground and deal with the stuff that's up there as best as we can, as fast as we can, as intelligently as we can. Do we know the right way? No. Will there be some magic science bullet that comes along in 2 years' time and fixes everything? Highly unlikely, I think, but there might be lots of things we can do. So I think we just can't get distracted by arguing about the smaller things. We have to all keep really clear on what we want to see happen, what we want to see change. And practice it. Like, here again is my bias. I'm hypocritical. I'm here surrounded by gadgets. I'm getting on a plane at the end of the week. The guilt of that is huge.
Yeah.
I don't know how to reconcile that in my own personal life. Do what I can in every way I can think of, but I'm still guilty of overconsumption and using more than I should be and not living a sustainable lifestyle. So who am I to preach? You know, so I've got to be really careful of the preaching thing. All I can do is go, come on, I'm a science communicator. Let's just try and understand and communicate the understanding of the science so then everybody what's a good idea for them to do in their life and their world.
Yeah.
I wish more, but I don't know how to.
Well, I mean, okay, so that's leading me on to the next question. So translating complex information, which you have to do all the time, you know, there's a couple of challenges there. Firstly, making it easy to understand. And then also, I guess, telling it to people in a way that is going to make them care, you know, and engage with it. So do you have an approach? I mean, how do you approach something like this? You do the research and then what happens?
Yeah, do the research. Well, first of all, we get clear on what do we think we want to do? What are we trying to communicate? Get clear on what you think you're trying to communicate. And then do the deep dive research and make sure what you're trying to communicate is accurate and your bias, check your own bias and all that sort of stuff. Find out about your audience, understand your audience, make sure you understand what triggers them, as I said before. Then come up with the most creative, interesting, curiosity inducing way to approach that story. Then comes a really important bit, and in my world it's quite unusual. Test it on your audience. Find some people that represent the people you're trying to connect to. If it's journalism or if it's a short video, find your climate skeptics or the people who think it's all greenwashing. Go find them, show them it. Even you do, set cameras up and watch them, because what they say and what you see is very different. So we film people say that the camera's filming me watching my film, and then suddenly someone will go, you know, and you go, oh, and when you've got 10 people that you're testing and they all do it around about the 6-minute 42 mark, what's going on there?
Yeah.
Now there's something we did that we didn't realize, switched them off or made them go, I don't believe this anymore.
Yeah.
And it's using the practice of science to do science communication. Because what is science? Science is basically, you know, having a hypothesis that you then test to see if that hypothesis holds. And if the hypothesis doesn't hold, then you have to adjust your hypothesis. So in a way, you've got an idea of what you want to communicate. You take it out to the audience you want to communicate, and you genuinely find out as best as you can what their response is. And then you might have to modify. Now that's time expensive. In my world, it costs about $100,000 every time we have to do this. Really does. But we do it. And now I enroll universities to help us do it, and because I don't have the expertise to truly take out bias. But I'd say test it. Find your mates that are skeptical, show it to them. Give them anonymity if you can, you know, if it's written stuff about giving feedback, find out if it's working.
Just jumping back to renewables.
Yep.
Obviously, a lot of the video production that takes place in our industry is of a commercial nature, although still has an important job to do. What are some of the parallels that you can take? I mean, if you were to today, you know, put your commercial hat on and go and make, you know, a video for a corporate video about renewable energy, what would be your approach and what would you take from filmmaking into that?
I started doing corporate filmmaking and education filmmaking 20 odd years ago, so I came in part, and actually I found it was very useful, because when you're making corporate communication, you have to please the client, right? The brief, and there's a discipline in that, because you know your audience. Your audience is your client or your client's audience. So in some ways, people I think who work in this area already have an advantage, because you know how to target. That's your job, targeting. What would I bring if I was going to do it now? I guess I would bring a bit more bravery, a sense of really go for narrative, really narrative and metaphor, so powerful. Most people know this. I would stick my neck out more because what people remember is stuff that's different. There's lots of so trying to figure out what's fresh, what's new, what's different, what hasn't been done, and trying to convince your client that that is a useful way to go. And I think with renewables in particular, there's so much hope. You know, what you're selling now at this moment in time, this moment in history, is hope at a scale that has never really been done and never needed more. So going for the hope. I would be helping people just see promise and hope and possibility up ahead. And I would be really, really careful around the doom and gloom storytelling. I think right now is the time for being inspired and uplifted. So if I'm in films in this area right now, I wouldn't lie, because you can't lie. So there's a, you know, there's a careful balance about the need for this. But if the renewable, like looking at a really great solar installation plant or some really new way of doing wind, or, you know, new electric vehicles that just do something really clever and don't need that big or that big or cost less or whatever, better photovoltaics, you know, all that sort of stuff, I would be going, hello, look at my sparkly, beautiful thing I have to offer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's where, you know, there is recognition within the industry. I guess there's a shared knowledge of the position that we are in, and that, yeah, I guess it feels like we are we're fighting for something and we're moving towards a solution. I tell my fellow members of the industry that, you know, back when I first entered the industry in 2013, it felt very much like advocacy work. You know, there was a lot of lobbying. There was, you know, we were fighting for something, fighting for political change. You know, we've started to see that come through now, and the whole industry is sort of pinching themselves going, okay, what do we do now? You know, and there's investment flooding in as well, which is fantastic. So it's, yeah, I guess people are grappling with the idea that they've been producing, you know, videos and content that is commercial in nature. And now we can afford to get a bit, you know, emotive about it, and that's okay. So, you know, it's finding that balance, and learning to be storytellers too, because at the end of the day, if we're to change behaviour on a grand scale, that's what's required.
Yes, understand and get that gist, that tiny one comment, the one thing you want them to walk away with, you know. And the old days, people only really remember 3 things from anything you make. So what are those 3? Don't shove 25 things in there. Get really clear and then weave it cleverly. Don't overpromise. I guess that's the real tricky bit at the moment. You know, if you have a renewable tech that has some issues around it, be honest. Overpromise. You know, embrace complexity, acknowledge uncertainty. People trust you more. There's study after study after study that shows this. They trust your messaging more when you're honest, when you acknowledge uncertainty. So this, I think this factory is going to do. Under these and these tests, it's been amazing. It's so cool. Now, of course, we don't know what happens over here, but, you know, of course, it'll do that. Acknowledging uncertainty is actually a tool that works for you, not against you. Also, 20 years ago when I was doing corporate and education kind of stuff, you wanted to sound like you had all the answers, right? And the school of thinking was present the facts, the truth. And I do this silly thing because, come on, science changes, facts change, we learn more, overturn stuff. So acknowledging uncertainty means people move towards you, they lean in.
Yeah, it builds trust. Yeah, I think when something is too perfect, we are suspicious. Yeah,
this is the thing. You guys, you know, I'm not making commercials. Maybe you are sometimes, but that's, you know, making a commercial is just sell. Making communication or an educational film has a different kind of function, a different purpose. Making documentaries has a different purpose again. So it's knowing the purpose, knowing your audience, and being clear on that. So, and then doing the damnedest to tell a good story.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, thank you so much, Sonya, for making the time today. And I just wanted to quickly touch on, well, firstly, congratulations, because Carbon has been doing so well. The awards, from what I understand, are still rolling in.
Yes, we won last night. We won a big film in the Global Science Film Festival with the Swiss Academy of Science. The Grand Prix, biggest film of 2023. So that's great.
Congratulations.
Awards now. And we've got a couple more coming up, I think, in the next 2 weeks. So there's quite a lot going on.
Amazing.
It's good because it just means it's getting out there. And it's lovely to have, people acknowledging they can see the work, especially the science films with the straight film festivals. Oh, we're nominated for the Canadian Academy of the equivalent Academy Awards in Canada. That's all films, not science.
Wow,
that's
amazing. Congratulations.
Tough lineup, but it's just lovely to be up there. So it's all that 5 years of slog worth it.
Yeah, and you deserve every bit of it. Oh, well, I hope, I guess we'll watch your social media, the Gene Pool social media, to see if you win that one. That would be interesting.
So the Carbon Facebook page and the Carbon the Unauthorised Biography. And if people want to see it, they can still see it on ABC Catch Up in Australia. And if they want to find out where to see it in the rest of the world, it's all on our website. So that's
beautiful.
Yeah,
great. And I can say, if you haven't seen it, anyone watching, it's an absolute must watch.